The most interesting thing happened about 2 weeks after I returned home. Michael finally called. I was in my garden, deadheading the roses. Robert had planted years ago, hybrid teas that bloomed twice a season, and required more attention than I probably should have been giving them at my age. But they were Robert's favorites. The deep red ones that reminded him of his mother's garden in Iowa, and tending them felt like a conversation with him across the years. My hands were dirty from soil and green from rose stems when my phone rang. For a split second, my heart jumped the way it used to when he was young and calling to share good news about a promotion or a new girlfriend, or just to ask for my opinion about something that mattered to him. Then I remembered where we stood now, and I let it go to voicemail. I finished with the roses before listening to the message, taking my time to clean my hands and settle into the patio. The boarding announcement echoed through Terminal C as I clutched my worn leather handbag closer. The antique cameo brooch inside, pressing against my hip through the fabric. Gate 22. That is where I stood when the message arrived on my flip phone, struggling to read the tiny letters with my reading glasses perched on my nose. Plans changed. Small ceremony, only immediate family. No signature, no explanation. Just those 7 words that crumbled everything I had planned for 6 months. The young woman behind me was FaceTiming someone, her suitcase decorated with university stickers. A businessman paced nearby, barking into his Bluetooth about quarterly projections. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they belonged, while I stood frozen, reading the same message over and over, hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something kinder. I am Ruth Caldwell, 71 years old, widow of 14 years. And I had just flown 2,000 miles from my little house in Tucson to watch my son Michael marry his fiancée in Charleston, only to discover I was no longer welcome at my own child's wedding. The boarding passes felt heavy in my arthritis. Swollen fingers. First class, a splurge I couldn't really afford on my teacher's pension. But I wanted to feel special, wanted to arrive rested and presentable for what I thought would be one of the most important days of my life. I had even gotten my hair done at the salon, asked Janet to style it the way she does for church ladies attending fancy events. My suitcase contained everything I would carefully selected over months of preparation. The dove gray dress with pearl buttons that took me 3 shopping trips to find. New shoes that pinched slightly but looked elegant. My grandmother's cameo brooch, the one passed down through 4 generations of Caldwell women, each one wearing it on their wedding day. I had polished it until it gleamed, wrapped it in velvet, imagining the moment I would pin it on Michael's bride and tell her the story of great-grandmother Violet, who wore it when she married a railroad man in 1892. The gift sat carefully packed beneath my clothes. A crystal vase engraved with their wedding date. A check folded inside a cream, colored card with their names written in my best penmanship. Money I had saved by skipping my usual summer trip to visit my sister in Oregon. Money I had set aside by buying generic groceries and clipping coupons like I was still raising children on a tight budget. But mostly, my suitcase held hope. The foolish, stubborn hope of a 71-year-old woman who believed that being a mother still meant something in this world. I looked around the gate area, watching other passengers prepare to board. A family with 3 young children, the mother counting Carrie, on bags while the father corralled a toddler. An elderly couple sharing a crossword puzzle, the woman's hand resting comfortably on her husband's arm. Normal people leading normal lives. All of them blissfully unaware that my entire reason for being here had just evaporated with a text message. My phone buzzed again. For a moment, my heart leaped. Maybe it was an explanation, an apology, a mistake that could be corrected. But it was just an automated reminder about checking in for my return flight. Even my phone seemed to know I would be going home sooner than planned. I thought about calling him, about pressing his number and demanding an explanation. But something stopped me. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the fear that his voice would be irritated rather than apologetic. Or maybe, deep down, I already knew this wasn't a sudden change of plans, but a careful elimination, like removing an unwanted item from a shopping cart before checkout. The first boarding group was called Business Class Passengers and Families with Small Children. I watched them file past the gate agent, tickets scanned, smiles exchanged, everyone heading somewhere they were wanted. I remained seated on the uncomfortable plastic chair, my boarding pass growing damp in my palm. Through the window, I could see my plane, silver and blue, ready to carry me away from this place. I would never really been invited to begin with. A maintenance worker pushed a cart past my row, whistling something cheerful and off-key. He nodded at me with that casual politeness airport employees show elderly passengers. In his eyes, I was probably just another grandmother heading to a family celebration, maybe carrying hand-knitted blankets and homemade cookies in my carry. On if only he knew how wrong he was. The thing is, Michael used to need me, really need me. When his father died of a sudden heart attack 15 years ago, Michael was the one who held me as I sobbed into his shoulder at the funeral home. He took care of the arrangements I couldn't handle, answered the phone calls I couldn't face, made sure I ate something other than peanut butter sandwiches during those first impossible weeks. He was 28 then, still single, still coming home for Sunday dinners and major holidays, still calling me Mom with warmth in his voice, instead of the polite distance that crept in later. We used to sit on my back patio in the evenings, him nursing a beer while I sipped sweet tea, talking about everything and nothing, about his job at the engineering firm, about the woman he was dating, about whether I should finally replace the ancient washing machine that shook the whole house when it ran. Those conversations feel like they belonged to different people now, like they were performed by actors who have since moved on to other roles. The change happened gradually, the way most heartbreak does. First, he moved to Charleston for a better position, understandable. Young people need to chase opportunities. Then he met Stephanie, daughter of a prominent local family, educated at private schools I had never heard of, speaking with that soft Southern accent that made my Arizona drawl sound harsh by comparison. The phone calls became shorter. Holiday visits turned into holiday phone calls. Sunday dinners became monthly check-ins, then occasional texts. When I offered to visit, there was always a reason why the timing wasn't good. Work was busy, Stephanie was stressed, the guest room was being renovated. Always next month, next season, next year. But I kept sending money that never became inconvenient. When Michael called last December, voice tight with something that might have been embarrassment, explaining that their heating system had failed right before Christmas and the repair was going to cost more than they had budgeted for, I transferred $3,000 without hesitation. It is what mothers do. We fix what we can, when we can, however we can. When Stephanie's car was totaled by a drunk driver in February, guess who quietly paid the insurance deductible so they could replace it immediately? When Michael's company delayed some bonuses and their mortgage payment was going to be late, who made sure their credit stayed clean? I never asked for thanks, never kept track in any formal way, but somewhere in my heart, I suppose I believed that all that quiet support was building something. A bridge, a connection, a reason for them to want me present for the big moments. Apparently, I was wrong. The second boarding group was called. I remained seated, watching gate agents scan more tickets, welcome more passengers onto the plane that was supposed to carry me to my son's wedding. My arthritic hands fumbled with my phone, opening his contact information. Michael David Caldwell. Under relationship, I had typed my heart years ago, back when it still felt true. I stared at his number for a long time. 7 digits that used to mean safety, comfort, someone who would always pick up when I called. Now they just looked like a combination lock I no longer had the code for. Another buzz. This time it was my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. Hope you are having a wonderful time at the wedding. Cannot wait to see pictures. I had told half the neighborhood about this trip, shown them the dress I had bought, mentioned how excited I was to finally meet some of Stephanie's family, hinted that maybe this would be the beginning of more regular visits. Mrs. Patterson had even volunteered to water my small garden while I was gone, refusing payment, saying it was what neighbors did for each other. How do you explain to people who still believe in family loyalty that your own son has decided you are too embarrassing for his new life? How do you admit that the woman who raised him, who sacrificed for him, who would still give him anything he needed, isn't good enough for his wedding day? The third boarding group was announced. I finally stood up, my knees protesting after sitting in the hard plastic chair for too long. But instead of getting in line, I walked to the customer service counter. "Excuse me," I said to the tired-looking woman behind the desk. "I need to cancel my flight and find a hotel room instead." She looked up from her computer screen, taking in my carefully styled gray hair, my good dress, the confusion that must have been written across my face. "Are you sure, madam? The flight's about to board." "I am sure," I said, though nothing in my life had ever felt less certain. "I am sure." An hour later, I sat in the back of a taxi driven by a young man with kind eyes and a slight accent I couldn't place. When he asked if I was visiting Charleston for business or pleasure, I found myself saying, "family obligations." It wasn't exactly a lie. I was here because of family, just not in the way either of us had expected. The hotel I had chosen was nothing special, a mid-range chain near the airport. The kind of place business travelers use when they need something clean and quiet for a night or two. The room smelled faintly of industrial carpet cleaner and had artwork that looked like it came from a catalog titled "Inoffensive Landscapes for Corporate Settings." I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, still wearing my traveling clothes, the unopened suitcase at my feet like a loyal dog waiting for instructions. The afternoon light filtered through the heavy curtains, casting everything in amber tones that would have been pretty under different circumstances. My phone sat silent on the nightstand. No follow-up messages. No calls checking to make sure I had received the news okay. No second thoughts or family pressure that might have resulted in a sheepish invitation after all. Just silence, which somehow hurt more than anger would have. I thought about what my husband Robert would have said if he were still alive. Robert had never been one for dramatic confrontations, but he had a quiet way of making his disapproval known. When Michael was 16 and came home 2 hours past curfew with alcohol on his breath, Robert didn't yell. He just sat at the kitchen table the next morning, reading the newspaper, and said, "Son, if you cannot be trusted with small responsibilities, how can we trust you with bigger ones?" That was it. No lecture, no punishment. Just a statement that made Michael think harder about his choices than any grounding could have. Robert would have called Michael directly, voice calm but unmistakably serious, and asked for an explanation. He would have said something like, "Michael, help me understand how a man uninvites his mother from his wedding and thinks that is acceptable behavior." Robert understood that respect wasn't automatic, even between family members. It had to be maintained, tended like a garden, or it withered away. He also understood that sometimes people needed to be reminded of who they used to be before they decided who they wanted to become. But Robert was 14 years in the ground, buried in the section of desert memorial gardens where they plant olive trees between the headstones. I visited him every few months, usually on Sundays after church, carrying whatever flowers were blooming in my garden. I had sit on the little concrete bench and tell him about my week, about Jennifer's progress in school, about Mrs. Patterson's ongoing battle with her homeowners association over the color of her front door. I never told him about the growing distance with Michael. Somehow it felt like admitting failure, like confessing that I would let something precious slip through my fingers while I wasn't paying attention. Now, sitting alone in this hotel room, I realized I should have told him, should have said it out loud, the way you do with problems that need solving. "Robert, our son is treating me like an ATM with inconvenient emotions attached." Maybe saying it to someone who loved us both would have helped me see the pattern earlier, would have given me permission to stop making excuses for behavior that would have horrified the man who raised that boy. The cameo brooch lay on the dresser, where I would carefully placed it after unpacking. 4 generations of women had worn it on their wedding days, each one passing it down with stories of love and commitment and the importance of family traditions. My own grandmother had pressed it into my palm the morning I married Robert, telling me that some things were more valuable than money because they carried the love of everyone who had owned them before. Now it sat on cheap hotel furniture, its purpose evaporated, its history reduced to sentiment that apparently no longer mattered to anyone but me. I called the hotel's front desk and asked for the number of a good local restaurant that delivered. The young man who answered was cheerful and helpful, recommending a southern place that specialized in comfort food. When he asked if I was celebrating anything special, I almost laughed. Just being somewhere new, I said. The food arrived 40 minutes later. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans that had been cooked with bacon until they were soft and flavorful. The kind of meal I would have shared with Robert on a Saturday evening. Both of us too tired from the week to cook, but too comfortable with each other to need fancy restaurants. I ate slowly, watching the local news on the hotel television. A story about a charity drive for the Children's Hospital. Another about road construction that would affect the morning commute. Normal life continuing normally for everyone except me. When I finished eating, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my sister Linda in Oregon. "Ruthie," her voice was bright with surprise. "Aren't you supposed to be at a wedding right now?" I told her everything. The text message, the canceled flight, the hotel room, the brooch sitting uselessly on the dresser. Linda listened without interrupting, making small sounds of sympathy and outrage in all the right places. "What are you going to do?" she asked when I finished. "I don't know," I admitted. "I honestly don't know." "Come here," she said immediately. "Change your ticket and come to Portland instead. We will figure it out together." For a moment, I was tempted. Linda's house was warm and welcoming, full of grandchildren's artwork, and the smell of whatever she was always baking. She would let me cry if I needed to, or rage if that felt better, or just sit quietly drinking coffee until I was ready to talk. But running to my sister felt like admitting defeat, like accepting that this was just how things were now, that I should be grateful for the family members who still tolerated me and stop expecting more from the ones who didn't. "Not yet," I said. "I need to think first." After we hung up, I opened my laptop and did something I had been avoiding for months. I logged into my bank account and looked at the real numbers, the quiet stream of support I had been sending to Charleston, the emergency transfers that had become routine, the gifts and supplements and little helps that had been flowing from my fixed income to their dual-career household. I opened a spreadsheet. Robert had taught me to use Excel years ago when I was tracking my classroom expenses for tax purposes, and started entering dates and amounts, every transfer, every check, every small favor that had accumulated over 3 years of trying to stay relevant in my son's life. December 2020. $3,000 for the heating system repair. I remembered that call so clearly, Michael's voice tight with what I had interpreted as embarrassment, explaining how the ancient furnace had finally given up during Charleston's brief but bitter cold snap. "We will pay you back as soon as the insurance processes," he had said. The insurance money had come through in January. I never saw repayment, and after a few weeks, it felt awkward to mention it. February 2021, $1,500 for Stephanie's car insurance, deductible after the accident. "Just until we can shuffle some things around," Michael had said. "You know how it is with end-of-month timing." I knew how it was. Robert and I had been young and struggling once too, counting days until payday, moving money between checking and savings to cover unexpected expenses. The difference was, we had always paid back what we borrowed, usually with homemade cookies or a dinner invitation as interest. May 2021, $800 for what Michael called moving expenses when they relocated to a nicer neighborhood. "Stephanie's pregnant, Mom, and the current place just isn't safe enough for raising a baby." I had been thrilled about the pregnancy news, so excited about becoming a grandmother that I would have paid twice that amount. The baby had been miscarried at 8 weeks. I would send flowers, a sympathy card, and another $500 for whatever you need during this difficult time. They had used it for a weekend getaway to Virginia Beach. August 2021, $2,200 for what was described as unexpected medical bills, but which I later discovered through Jennifer's casual mention were actually wedding planning expenses that had gone over budget. The venue deposit, the photographer's additional fees for extended coverage, the upgraded flower arrangements that Stephanie's mother had insisted upon. November 2021, $1,800 for Thanksgiving travel expenses. We really want to come see you, Mom, but airline prices are insane right now. They had canceled the trip 3 days before Thanksgiving, citing Stephanie's work schedule, but kept the money. I had spent that holiday eating a Stuffers turkey dinner and watching football alone, too proud to call my neighbors and ask if I could join their gathering. The list went on and on. Every month, sometimes twice a month, another small emergency that required immediate assistance from Mom's apparently bottomless bank account. Individual amounts that seemed reasonable, even generous, when viewed through the lens of maternal love. But when added up in black and white, they told a different story entirely. The total was staggering, over $43,000 in the past 3 years. Money I had saved by driving my 15-year-old Honda until the transmission needed major repairs, then driving it another year with the repairs half done because the full fix cost more than the car was worth. Money I had conserved by keeping my thermostat at 68 degrees all winter and 76 all summer, even though my arthritis preferred warmer temperatures. Money I had accumulated by buying brand groceries and generic medications and clothing from discount stores, telling myself that these small sacrifices were investments in my family's future. $43,000 to people who couldn't be bothered to save me a chair at their wedding, who couldn't even deliver the disinvitation with a phone call. I saved the spreadsheet and closed the laptop, then sat staring at my hands. These hands had signed every check, approved every transfer, typed every wire routing number with the care of someone who believed she was building bridges, instead of being systematically harvested for resources. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a while, watching the lights of Charleston twinkle beyond my hotel window. Somewhere out there, Michael was probably having his bachelor party. Stephanie was likely getting her nails done one final time, maybe having a last-minute dress fitting or rehearsal dinner. Normal pre-wedding activities for normal families who hadn't just exiled the groom's mother via text message. My arthritis was acting up, probably from the stress and the change in weather. My hands ached as I rubbed prescription cream into the swollen joints, thinking about all the tasks these hands had performed over the years, changing diapers and tying shoes and packing lunches, grading papers and writing lesson plans, and staying up late to finish Halloween costumes, signing checks and transferring money and quietly covering expenses that weren't really mine to cover. But never again. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for my bank. Even though it was after business hours, I knew their automated system would let me stop scheduled transfers and change account permissions. It took 15 minutes to cancel every automatic payment going to Charleston, every scheduled transfer, every linked account privilege that allowed Michael to see my balances or request emergency funds. When I finished, my checking account felt lighter somehow. Not because the money was gone, but because it was finally mine again. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity, the kind that comes after a fever breaks or a difficult decision finally gets made. The hotel room felt different in the morning light, not sad anymore, but purposeful. I stood at the window for a long time, watching Charleston wake up below me, joggers on the sidewalks, coffee shops lifting their metal security gates, the steady stream of people heading to work with purpose in their steps. I ordered room service coffee and toast, then sat with my laptop open to the hotel's Wi-Fi, researching something I had never thought I had need to know about. Local attorneys' estate planning, how to change a will in South Carolina versus Arizona, the legal implications of financial elder abuse, which is what I was beginning to understand had been happening to me, even if no one called it that. The coffee was better than I had expected, strong and bitter in a way that matched my mood. I made a list in the hotel notepad, my handwriting shakier than it used to be, but still legible. Names of law firms. Phone numbers. Questions to ask. This wasn't impulse, this was preparation. Not because I wanted to sue anyone, because I wanted to protect what was left of my dignity and my future. The law office I chose was downtown, in a converted antebellum house with white columns and deep porches, the kind of building that suggested both permanence and respectability. A brass plaque by the front door read Thompson and Associates. Est. 1952. The kind of place that had probably been handling family matters since before I was born, weathering decades of Charleston's social and economic changes. I climbed the front steps slowly, my knees protesting the steep rise, and found myself in a reception area that smelled faintly of old leather and lemon oil. The furniture looked like it had been carefully maintained rather than recently purchased. Queen Anne chairs with worn but elegant upholstery, a mahogany desk that probably predated air conditioning. The receptionist was a woman about my age with silver hair styled in a neat chignon and laugh lines around her eyes that suggested she had seen her share of family drama and retained her sense of humor. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said, when I gave my name. "Mr. Thompson is expecting you. Can I offer you some tea or coffee while you wait?" I opted for tea, and she brought it in a proper china cup with a matching saucer, the kind of service that had gone out of style in most places, but persisted in Southern law offices that understood the importance of civilized ritual during uncivilized conversations. "I need to update my will," I told her when she asked how they could help me today. "Remove my son as beneficiary and establish a trust for my granddaughter instead." Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes suggested this wasn't the first time she had heard those particular words from a woman my age. "Mr. Thompson handles all our estate planning. He will want to discuss your options with you personally." She didn't ask questions, just scheduled me an appointment for that afternoon with Mr. Thompson, a gentle man in his 60s who spoke with the same soft Charleston accent as his secretary, but whose eyes held the sharp intelligence of someone who had spent decades helping people navigate the complicated intersection of law and family. "This is quite a substantial change," he said, reviewing the copies of documents I would brought with me, my current will, bank statements, documentation of the property I owned. He had spread everything across his desk in neat piles, occasionally making notes in the margins with a fountain pen that looked like it predated computers. "Are you certain this reflects your current wishes, Mrs. Caldwell?" I told him about the wedding invitation that had become a disinvitation, about the 3 years of financial support that had gone unacknowledged, about the gradual transformation of my relationship with my son from mother, child to creditor, debtor, complete with the creditor's eventual obsolescence. He listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making soft sounds of understanding. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied me with the kind of careful attention I hadn't received from anyone in months. "You know," he said finally, "in 40 years of practice, I have seen this scenario more times than I care to count. Adult children who have confused financial support with maternal obligation, parents who have enabled that confusion because they mistake generosity for love." "Completely certain," I said. "My granddaughter Jennifer has never made me feel like an inconvenience. She calls me every week, visits when she can, remembers my birthday without being reminded. She asks about my health not because she is worried about her inheritance, but because she is worried about me. She is 20 years old, studying nursing at Arizona State, and working part-time at a veterinary clinic to help pay for school. She sends me pictures of the animals she helps care for and tells me about her classes and her boyfriend and her dreams of working in pediatric oncology someday. If anyone deserves my life savings, it is her." "And your son?" I looked out the window of his office, where Spanish moss hung from ancient live oaks like nature's own curtains, filtering the afternoon light into something softer and more forgiving than the harsh reality of family relationships. "My son will be fine," I said finally. "He has a good job as a civil engineer, a wife who works in marketing for a tech company, and apparently doesn't need anything from me except money. Since he has decided I am not worth including in his major life events, I have decided he is not worth including in my estate planning. Mr. Thompson nodded slowly, making another note with his fountain pen. Would you like to include a letter of explanation to be read after your death? Sometimes it helps clarify your intentions if anyone should choose to contest the will. No, I said firmly. Let the absence speak for itself. If he hasn't figured out why he has been removed after receiving $43,000 in 3 years and still uninviting me from his wedding, a letter isn't going to provide any enlightenment he is capable of receiving. We spent the next hour discussing the specifics of trust structures, the advantages of revocable versus irrevocable arrangements, the tax implications of various choices. Mr. Thompson explained everything in careful detail, making sure I understood not just what I was doing, but why each provision mattered for Jennifer's future security. The trust we are establishing will give Jennifer access to funds for education, health care, and housing until she turns 25, he explained, at which point she will gain full control of the remaining assets. This protects her from making impulsive financial decisions while she is still young, but ensures she will have substantial resources to build the life she chooses. That is exactly what I want, I said. She is responsible for her age, but she is still learning how the world works. I want to give her opportunities, not ruin her judgment. We will also include provisions preventing your son from contesting the trust or attempting to influence Jennifer's access to the funds. And we will establish a clause that if Jennifer predeceases you or chooses to disclaim her inheritance, the assets will go to the American Cancer Society rather than reverting to your son. I smiled at that. Even in hypothetical scenarios, Michael wouldn't benefit from my generosity again. The paperwork took 2 hours to complete. When I signed the final document, my signature was steady and sure. Ruth Margaret Caldwell, written in the same careful script I had used to sign report cards and permission slips and mortgage documents for 47 years. But this signature felt different. This one was drawing a line. As I left the law office, my phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. Hi, Grandma. How is the wedding prep going? Are you nervous about meeting all of Stephanie's family? I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Change of plans. Sweetheart, I will call you later. The rest of my Charleston stay passed quietly. I visited the historic district, toured some gardens, ate at restaurants I had never have tried if I had been busy with wedding activities. I bought postcards but didn't send them. I took pictures of beautiful old houses and Spanish moss, but didn't post them on social media. Mostly, I walked. Hours of walking through neighborhoods where other families were probably preparing for Saturday celebrations that would include all the people they loved. The wedding happened on a Saturday afternoon. I know because I looked it up. The venue was a historic plantation house about 30 minutes outside the city. The kind of place that photographs beautifully and costs more than most people's cars. I didn't drive by. I didn't try to catch a glimpse from the road. Instead, I spent that afternoon at a local art museum, looking at paintings created by people who understood that beauty could exist alongside sadness, that sometimes the most honest art came from the places that hurt the most. When I finally flew home to Tucson on Sunday morning, the brooch was still in my carry, on bag wrapped in velvet, unused. I thought about leaving it in the hotel room dresser drawer, but that felt like littering. It wasn't the brooch's fault that no one wanted its history. Mrs. Patterson was watering my tomato plants when the taxi dropped me off. She rushed over with a huge smile, ready to hear all about the wedding, see photos of the beautiful bride, learn whether I had cried during the ceremony. How was it? She asked eagerly. Different than I expected, I said, which was probably the truest thing I had said in weeks. She waited for more details, but when I just smiled tiredly and headed toward my front door, she seemed to understand that some stories needed time before they could be shared. My house felt smaller than I remembered. Quieter, but not in a bad way. In a way that felt honest. No one was going to call needing money for car repairs or medical bills or home improvements. No one was going to text last, minute changes to carefully made plans. No one was going to make me feel guilty for existing in their peripheral vision. I unpacked slowly, hanging the gray dress in my closet next to clothes that actually fit my life. The crystal vase went on a shelf in my guest room, where it caught the afternoon light and reminded me that some gifts are beautiful, even when they are not given. The brooch went into my jewelry box, nestled next to my wedding ring and the pearl earrings Robert had given me for our 20th anniversary. Still valuable, still meaningful, just waiting for someone who would truly appreciate its significance. And the money that had been automatically flowing to Charleston every month, that stayed in Tucson, where it started earning interest in a special account I set up for Jennifer's education. Money that would help her finish nursing school without crushing debt, buy her first reliable car, maybe make a down payment on a small house when she was ready. Money that would go to someone who had never made me feel like a burden for offering it. The most interesting thing happened about 2 weeks after I returned home. Michael finally called. I was in my garden, deadheading the roses Robert had planted years ago when my phone rang. For a split second, my heart jumped the way it used to when he was young and calling to share good news or ask for advice. Then I remembered where we stood now, and I let it go to voicemail. "Hi, Mom," his recorded voice said. "Just wanted to check in and see how you are doing. The wedding was nice, small, like we planned. Hope you are staying cool in that Arizona heat. Talk to you soon." No apology. No explanation. No acknowledgement that anything unusual had happened. I played the message 3 times, listening for something I might have missed, some hint of remorse, or awareness, or even basic human decency. There was nothing. I deleted the message and went back to my roses. The next call came a month later. This time I answered, partly out of curiosity about what he wanted, partly because I had reached a point where his voice no longer had the power to destabilize my day. "Mom. Hi, it is Michael." "Hello, Michael." My tone was pleasant but neutral, the way I might greet an acquaintance at the grocery store. "How are you? You sound different." "I am fine. How are you and Stephanie settling into married life?" "Good, good, really good." There was a pause, and I could hear him shifting gears, moving from small talk to the real reason for his call. "Actually, that is kind of why I am calling. We have been looking at our finances, planning for the future. And it turns out Stephanie's student loans are higher than we initially calculated. Her graduate program was more expensive than we thought. And with the wedding expenses on top of everything else, money's a little tight right now. I was wondering if you could help us out with a payment or two, just until we get our feet under us financially." I looked out my kitchen window at Mrs. Patterson walking her ancient beagle, at the neighbor children riding bikes in the street with the careless confidence of youth, at the normal life continuing normally all around me, the life I had been living too, until I had decided to stop pretending that normal included subsidizing people who couldn't be bothered to include me in their lives. "No," I said calmly. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then, "No, I cannot help with that." Are you okay, Mom? Is everything all right with your accounts? Did something happen with your bank?" The concern in his voice might have been touching if it hadn't been so obviously focused on my financial capacity rather than my well-being. When had I last heard him ask about my health, my loneliness, my daily life? When had he last called just to talk, without needing something? "Everything's fine with my accounts, Michael. I just will not be sending money anymore." Another long pause. "I don't understand." "I think you do," I said. "You are a smart man with an engineering degree and 15 years of professional experience. I am confident you will figure it out." I hung up before he could respond, and found myself smiling for the first time in weeks. Not from cruelty, but from the simple relief of finally being honest. The third call came 2 weeks later. This time his voice was different. "Sharper, Mom. What is going on?" "The bank said you have canceled all the automatic transfers, and I cannot access the emergency account anymore." "That is correct. Why would you do that?" I was folding laundry when he called, matching socks and smoothing wrinkles from clothes that belonged to no one but me. The simple domestic task felt peaceful in a way it hadn't for years. Because emergency help should be for emergencies, Michael, not monthly expenses. And because people who don't include me in their lives don't get to include themselves in my bank account. This is about the wedding, he said. And I could hear something like understanding creeping into his voice. This is about respect, I said. Something you stopped showing me a long time ago. Mom, you don't understand. Stephanie's family has expectations. I understand perfectly, I interrupted. You chose them over me, that is your right, but you don't get to keep both the choice and the benefits. You are being ridiculous. And that is when I realized I was done. Michael, I said, my voice steady and clear. You uninvited your mother from your wedding with a text message. You cashed my checks without saying thank you. You let me become a stranger in your life while still expecting me to fund your lifestyle. If anyone's being ridiculous, it is not me. I hung up again. He hasn't called since. But Jennifer has, sweet Jennifer, who drove down from Phoenix the weekend after Michael's last call, worried because she could hear something different in my voice. During our weekly conversations, Grandma, she said, sitting at my kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, tell me what is really going on. So I did. All of it. The wedding invitation that became a disinvitation, the years of financial support that went unacknowledged, the gradual erosion of relationship into transaction. She listened without interrupting, her young face growing more serious with each detail. I am so sorry, she said when I finished. I had no idea he was treating you like that. It is not your fault, sweetheart. You have always been wonderful to me. What did you mean when you said you had taken care of my future? I explained about the will, the trust, the money that would help her finish school and start her adult life without debt. Grandma, that is too much. I cannot let you are not letting me do anything, I said firmly. I am choosing to invest in someone who has never made me feel ashamed of loving her, she cried then. Not from sadness but from something deeper. Relief maybe, or recognition that love didn't have to be complicated to be real. He will probably figure it out eventually, she said. About the money. The will, he might get angry, probably. I agreed, but I am 71 years old. Jennifer, I don't have time to wait for people to decide I am worth treating well. She stayed for dinner that night, helping me cook and chattering about her classes and her boyfriend and her plans for the future. Normal grandmother, granddaughter conversation, the kind I would almost forgotten was possible. As she was leaving, she hugged me tighter than usual. I love you, Grandma, not because of any money or inheritance or anything like that. Just because you are you, I know, I said. That is why you are the one getting everything. It has been 8 months now since the wedding that wasn't mine to attend. My life has settled into new rhythms that don't include waiting for phone calls that might not come or checking my bank balance to see what emergency had been transferred to Charleston. I have started volunteering at the children's literacy program at the library, reading stories to kindergartners who think I am the most fascinating person in the world because I have gray hair and know all the voices for where the wild things are. I have also started dating. Nothing serious. Just coffee with a retired professor named Henry, who lost his wife 2 years ago, and understands the specific loneliness of people who expected to grow old with someone. We talk about books and gardening and the grandchildren who still call us regularly. Sometimes we hold hands during movies. It is nice. Mrs. Patterson asked me last week if I had heard from Michael lately, and I realized I hadn't thought about him in days. Not with anger or sadness or even curiosity. He would simply stopped being part of my daily mental landscape. Not recently, I told her. But I am doing well, and I am. I am doing well in ways I forgot were possible when you spend years making yourself smaller and quieter to avoid being eliminated entirely. The cameo brooch sits in my jewelry box, waiting for Jennifer's eventual wedding day. because that is what family heirlooms do. They wait for family members who understand that some things are worth preserving. If you have read this far, let me tell you something important. If you recognize yourself in my story, if you have been the person sending money and receiving silence, offering love and getting lists of reasons why you are not quite good enough, it is not too late to choose differently. You don't have to fund your own dismissal. You don't have to apologize for existing in the lives of people who act like your love is a burden instead of a gift. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop enabling people to treat you badly. Sometimes the most generous act is refusing to subsidize your own erasure. I am 71 years old, and I am just now learning that I don't owe anyone my self-respect in exchange for the privilege of loving them. If that lesson helps even one person stop accepting crumbs from someone who should be offering a feast, then sharing this story was worth the vulnerability. You are not too old to start over. You are not too invested to change course. You are not too loving to require basic human decency. And you are never ever too late to choose yourself. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Share this story. If it resonated with you, comment below about times when setting boundaries changed your life. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is let others know they are not alone in choosing dignity over desperation.